Alright, hello everyone. My name is Cameron White. I'm an intern with OC Habitats. I'm also a student at Vanguard University. I'm studying environmental science and chemistry. And today I'm going to be talking about pollination, our pollinators of Orange County, ways that we can all get involved. And yeah, so we'll just get right into it. Okay, so what is pollination? So the dictionary definition will tell you pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the male anther of a flower to the female stigma of either itself or another flower. So you can see in the diagram over there, you can see those yellow parts that are sticking up. Those are the anthers, so those are the male parts. And then the female stigma is located in the middle. So when a pollinator comes to visit the flower, usually they're attracted by the bright colors or by the smells. They will come and usually feed on the nectar of the flower. And in doing so, it gets pollen stuck to its body or to its face, and that ends up moving the pollen from the stigma of the same flower, or it'll go from flower to flower and move the pollen around. All right, so why is this important? Well, for a variety of reasons. It has some benefits for plants and for humans. So for plants, it leads to the production of seeds and fruit. So pollination is the primary means of reproduction for many plants, and reproduction is the goal for offspring to produce more species for the next generation. And unsuccessful pollination leads to a population decline. So if a flower does not get a pollinator to come visit it, or if the flower dies before the pollinator comes to it, it will not be able to produce seeds and fruit and reproduce, and that leads to a population decline. And this affects us as humans as well. We do eat a lot of these fruits and vegetables here. So for us, 30% of the country's vegetables and 3/4 of the country's fruits and nuts are grown here in California. And in addition to that, over 90% of the nation's crops require pollination. So this is especially prevalent here in California, since we are considered kind of the breadbasket of the United States. We do produce a lot of our fruits and vegetables, so a lot of people around the country do rely on us, so it's important that we have our crops get pollinated. So moving on, so with pollination, plants are able to reproduce and provide more diversity for the species within an area. So you can see in the photo there are lots of different kinds of flowers there, lots of different colors, different kinds of plants. And so that's kind of what we call biodiversity. So just the presence of a lot of different species within an area. And so biodiversity has a variety of benefits. For example, food security, and that's not only just for us, but that's also for the organisms that are living in that area. So it provides food for them. It provides protection against disease as well. So for example, if a disease gets introduced to an area and it only affects one species, it won't completely wipe out the entire area. The other species will still be able to survive. And it also has positive impacts on human mental and physical health. So of course, like when we go outside or when we go on a hike, it's always really nice to see a lot of diversity around us, very calming for us. And for physical health as well, we do get a lot of our medicines from plants, so it's great to have that biodiversity. So on the other hand, we have monocultures, so it's kind of, you can think of it as the opposite of biodiversity. So you can see here in the photo, you'll just have one species here that completely covers an area, and this does have some negative effects. So for example, these areas are less resistant to disease. So if a disease gets introduced to the area, it can completely wipe out that whole area, and it leaves that area kind of barren, not a lot of habitat or food for the organisms that live there. And it degrades soil by reducing essential bacteria varieties that are needed for fertile soil. So if one species is living in an area, it's only going to absorb certain nutrients from the soil, and if it's only that one species, it's going to completely absorb that one kind of nutrient. And so that harms the bacteria and decomposer populations that are living in that soil. So that degrades the soil, it leads to less fertile soil, which is not very good. And going on with that, it does increase rain runoff, so less decomposers or decomposing kind of activity leaves less air pockets in the soil. The soil gets more compacted, and that leads to more rain runoff. So, does anything surprise you about pollination? Did anyone learn something new, or does anyone have a favorite kind of pollinator? Bees, butterflies, yeah, those are good ones.
Hummingbirds.
Hummingbirds, yeah.
Flies.
Flies, yeah.
Yeah, so many people don't think they're pollinators, but they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
My dog, she's always running through.
Yeah, that's a good one. That definitely helps spread the pollen around. Yeah. So next, I'm going to be talking about some of our pollinating species. So I heard bees. So bees are a great example of a pollinating species. So you can see the bee visits the flower, gets pollen on it, and moves from flower to flower. So bees are very important. They do actually pollinate 80% of all flowering plants, but there are many other pollinating species. So how many other pollinating species can we name?
Moths.
Moths, that's good.
Butterflies.
Butterflies, and you mentioned flies. So yeah, these are all different kinds of species. So I'm going to be talking about 3 different ones that are native here to Orange County. And so the first of these I'm going to be talking about is the Mexican free-tailed bat. So these are really cool. A lot of people don't know that bats are native here to Orange County. They do live around here. So these are our nocturnal pollinators, and they feed primarily on insects. And so here we are. So they feed primarily on insects, and they are actually considered to be a keystone species to help control our insect populations, which is really cool. And with that, they actually can consume 2/3 of their body weight in insects in one night. So without our bats, we would have a lot of insects roaming around. And so they are the primary pollinators of sugarcane and the agave plant used to make tequila. So they are important to make some of the goods that we enjoy as well. And these pollinators are attracted to large pale colored flowers that are more easily seen at night. So when a flower is usually really big, these large pale colored flowers are typically have a kind of a musty smell, and the bats are attracted to those. And when they are kind of that lighter color, it helps to stand out against the dark surroundings. So next, I'm going to be talking about Anna's hummingbird. So you might have seen this one in your backyard. So they are very common pollinators here, and they are actually one of 3 permanent hummingbird residents of the US and Canada. So they are here around us year-round. And they are an important pollinator of the chaparral flora of California. So that's a pretty common habitat that we see here around California and Orange County. And these pollinators are attracted to the brightly colored tubular flowers, as seen kind of in that photo there. So when they go around, they have this nice long bill that they can stick inside these tubular flowers, and they can feed on the nectar, and that helps to move the pollen around as well. And what's also cool about these hummingbirds is you can see on its throat there it has these special feathers, and that's called a gorget. And those feathers are actually sort of iridescent. They'll kind of shift colors in the light. You'll see colors of purple, pink, yellow, green. Yeah, they are very pretty hummingbirds. And lastly, we have the white-lined sphinx moth. So this is another nocturnal pollinator, and these get their name from the colorings on their wings. So they have white lines on their wings, if you can see in the photo there. And these are active from late afternoon to dawn, so you'll see them both in the daytime and at night. And they are especially adapted for pollinating as well, because they use their retractable proboscis to sip nectar deep from flowers. So their proboscis is that long tube-like tongue that comes from its face, as seen in the photo there. So those are able to extend when they're feeding from flowers, and they're able to hover while they're feeding from the flowers, and that's where the pollen sticks to and gets moved from flower to flower. So moths are attracted to brightly colored flowers in the day, kind of like that photo there, and white flowers at night, similar to the bat, so they're able to kind of stand out in the dark. So, can you think of any threats to pollinators?
Birds?
Yeah, birds, chemicals.
Should we not have hummingbird feeders? Is that bad?
It's not necessarily bad. No, you're helping to support them, but yeah, it's also good to have like bright colored flowers in your garden too that they can also visit. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about 4 different threats that we have to our pollinators. Yeah, so the first of these is pesticides. So a major chemical found in a lot of pesticides, like Roundup, is called glyphosate. So that's a pretty harmful chemical. It does eradicate pests, but it also is toxic to a lot of our common pollinators. And it's also toxic to humans as well. So it is overall pretty harmful ingredient that you might want to stay away from. And in addition to that, we have weed killers that contain dicamba. That's another toxic ingredient that deters pollinators as well. And lastly, some people might make these homemade vinegar-based sprays. Maybe they have good intentions to use something more natural, but those are actually harmful because they deter pollinators as well. So next up, we have urbanization. So this photo here is an aerial view of Anaheim from 2013. So if you can see in the photo there is not a lot of green space. So green space is sort of like the habitat, green areas and plants where organisms can live and feed and just live their lives. So not a lot of room to be doing that here in Anaheim. So this is in Orange County. So a lot of buildings, residential areas, and roads. So that can be pretty harmful, especially as urbanization has happened increasingly throughout the past decades. We have started to see shifting climate patterns as well, which has led to more extreme weather events. And with these shifting climate, it affects flower blooms and migration. So flowers might be blooming earlier in the season than they're supposed to. And when migrators come, for example, the monarch butterfly, they will come from Canada down to Southern California in the wintertime to come and feed. If they come and the flowers are not blooming, it can be harmful. They won't have as much food that they need to support and to live. So next is the introduction of non-native species. So pollinators can spread non-native plants, which can crowd out native ones. And this is not necessarily intentional. Some pollinators, they don't really know what kind of plants they're making spread around, but if they are available, they will feed from them. So flower visitors will directly pollinate some non-native plants, and some of these non-native plants can be invasive, which means that they can crowd out and over-compete with the native plants. And so if they're directly pollinating the invasive plants, those ones are able to reproduce quickly and compete with the native plants of the area. And when the native plants are in competition with the invasive plants, they might lead to a population decline. And that can change the resource availability for the pollinators themselves and other organisms in that habitat. So it can lead to less food availability and less habitat. And yeah, non-natives reduce food and shelter. And to go along with the introduction of non-native species, a lot of these non-native species can bring diseases and parasites. So this photo here is of a stylopid parasite. So this can be introduced by a non-native species. So this is a photo of a bee's abdomen. So kind of think of it as like its back, and it has these plates on its back. And that stylopid kind of has its back end sticking out, if you can see in the photo. And it actually had just produced offspring. And so what the stylopid does is it finds a bee and inserts itself into the bee, which would be its host. It feeds on the fluids of its host, and it can cause infertility, reduce scopae, which are the pollen-carrying structures of the bee, and changes in behavior. So it kind of leads to the bee to kind of like a zombie-like state. And so it will actually lead the bee to move away from the hive and facilitate mating behavior. So it'll move it away from the hive and actually make the bee stick its back end up, and that way the stylopid can attract a mate and then reproduce offspring, and that offspring will be able to live on the host until it dies and then move on to another bee. So it can be pretty destructive with having these non-native species being introduced, because things like this can happen and can infect a hive and kill off a lot of our bees. And so moving on, we actually have a discovery that has been made pretty recently. So this video I'm going to show is about the honeybee American foul brood disease. And so I'll just share the video real quick.
Bug you during the summer, but we desperately need these creatures. They are crucial to pollinating crops. How crucial? 1 out of every 3 bites of food you eat exists because of pollination. That's fresh produce, nuts, and yes, your cup of coffee. Think about it this way. Honeybees alone pollinate more than 100 types of fruits and vegetables. But a bacterial disease called American foul brood is now destroying bee colonies at alarming rates. Annette Kleiser, CEO of Delon Animal Health, says something must be done.
It's found in approximately 50% of beehives, that's the estimate, around the world. So it can lay dormant for many, many decades. And all of a sudden, if there's another stressor, if there's anything else happening, you know, it's like we know that from us, we can all of a sudden get sick. And that happens also to the bees.
Currently, there is no cure for this disease. Once foul brood is detected, beekeepers have to destroy the hive or use antibiotics, which can have some nasty side effects.
That comes with many, many problems: antibiotic resistance, contamination of honey, it weakens the microbiome of the honeybees. They can get other diseases because their immune system is compromised.
But over the last few years, Annette and her team have developed a promising vaccine that the U.S. Department of Agriculture just conditionally approved.
We take the disease-forming bug, kill it, we inactivate it. We put it in something that's called queen candy. It's a sugar paste that is given to the queen, so if she's vaccinated, she passes that vaccine on to all the eggs that she lays, and the entire colony is then protected.
Currently, Delon is seeking state-by-state approval for the vaccine, focusing on the large breeding areas like California and states along the Gulf Coast. And this is not just important for commercial beekeepers. This vaccine could be an absolute game changer for, well, all of us.
These animals are really critical, they're really important, and we all rely on them, and we have to take care of them. It's a real existential survival critical issue for everybody around the world.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top story.
There we go. All right, so I thought that video was pretty interesting just to see how destructive this disease can be and to find that there are ways that we can help vaccinate bees, which I thought was pretty cool. So hopefully this can be a great way to help beekeepers and also with protecting our pollinators and making sure that we can protect against these diseases. So next I'm going to be moving on to some ways that we can all help our pollinators here. So I have some pesticide alternatives. We have cedarwood oil, which is essential oil from the cedar tree. We have insecticidal soaps, which contain soap salts that help to eradicate pests and not the pollinators. And neem oil is another great option, which is essential oil from the neem tree. So these are all great kind of low toxic alternatives to pesticides if you are needing them for your garden. And if you do have to use a pesticide, it's best to spray them at dusk or dawn when pollinators are not as active. And it's best to avoid spraying flowers as well. So spray like the leaves or the base of the plant, and that way you're helping to avoid those areas that the pollinators go to. And next I have some native plant resources. So if you are interested in maybe growing a garden and helping to provide some more habitat and food for our local pollinators, these are some great options here. We have Tree of Life Nursery, Rogers Gardens, Environmental Nature Center, Seaside Growers Nursery, and Plant Depot. So these are some great options. These are just a few that we have here in Orange County. So you can help to promote the growth of our native plants, which helps to provide food and habitat for our pollinators. And lastly, we have some local volunteer opportunities. So of course we have OC Habitats. We're always open to volunteers if you are wanting to sign up. We also work with a couple other organizations. We have Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy and Project Grow, which is located in Upper Newport Bay. And a couple more organizations. We have Newport Bay Conservancy and Irvine Ranch Conservancy. I know they are also always looking for volunteers to come help out. And I have some photos here from some restoration projects that we have done. So this first one is from one of the projects we've done with Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy, where we've had some volunteers help to expand the wetland habitat by digging this trench and by planting more native plants in that area. We also have this one. So this one is when we another project we do with Project Grow, where we're helping to restore the riparian habitat in Upper Newport Bay. And that area has actually been sort of taken over by a lot of non-native and invasive plants. So we're helping to remove some of those plants and to plant the ones that are fit for a riparian habitat. And lastly, we have another photo from one of our projects with Project Grow as well. This is our Algerian sea lavender removal. So we remove the invasive Algerian sea lavender and help to promote the growth of our native California sea lavender, which helps to restore the habitat and provide a more healthy area for some of our endangered species like the building savanna sparrow and the ridgway's braille to come and find this habitat home and help to take care of it. We also do some debris removal as well. Yeah, so what is your biggest takeaway from this? Do you learn something new? Yeah?
The zombie bees.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty interesting too.
The bats. I
Yeah.
had no idea about the bats being this wonderful.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. We have, if you check out our website, we actually have a 2-part series of bats where we talk about the native plants, or native bats here that you can find in Orange County. You can learn more about them.
I know that, I think it's Steven State Audubon, they might do a bat tour, and it's probably coming up, I feel like it's coming up in May-ish, and I think they do a couple of them, and it's generally in the warmer, like they target the warmer time, so if you know, we don't do that, that's not our thing, but if you wanted to go view some bats in Orange County, they have some tours. If you go on their site, you can find it.
I have done that. It's called a bat walk. You sort of get special access to the marsh after dark, and you get to stand there and watch the bats fly around you for like an hour or so. And then they also have a presentation with like a bat expert, and they talk about the species and what they do.
Yeah, cool. So lastly, I have some resources if you are interested. I did post a link to the video if you do want a picture of it, or I can send it to you if you would like. I have some more information about native plants. This first one is a native plant database, so you can look up some native plants if you do want to help build your garden. Calscape.org is another kind of native plant database that's a great resource. I also added plant nursery link for Calscape, so you can look up native plant nurseries nearby from Calscape. And some more pesticide information is found at that bottom link there if you are interested. It's at pollinator.org. So yeah, that's everything I have for you. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. My contact information is up there. That's my email up top, and we also have the OC Habitats email there. And we are found on all of these social media sites if you do want to check us out. We are OC Habitats. And you can also visit our website to learn more about our native plants and animals and some of the projects that we're doing. Thank you.